Okay, this video is going to be how to improve immune function. I've just, some friends asked me to start reading about the immune system. So I started doing it. I had a couple interesting observations I'll share with you. I think you're going to find these helpful to you. First thing is, the immune system is like Braille. There's billions of cells that travel all over the body feeling each other. And that's how they can tell if something is self, should be left alone, or non-self, needs to be removed from the body, or something is damaged, DAMPs, damage-associated molecular patterns. All of the immune system cells have what are called PRRs, pattern recognition receptors, and they recognize things called PAMPs, pathogen-associated molecular patterns, MAMPs, microbial-associated molecular patterns, DAMPs, damage-associated molecular patterns. So there's certain molecules that just should never be on a human cell, like LPS, the gram-negative bacterial endotoxin, LTA, the gram-positive bacterial endotoxin. Okay, and so it's pretty amazing. Imagine the genius of designing a system where all these cells could travel all over the body and recognize each other by their Braille-like signatures, meaning the feel of the proteins, glycoproteins, on their outer surfaces. And it's kind of amazing. This is one of the things that makes me believe in God. It's way too complex. People who don't know much about science might think, atheism or simple variation of evolution could explain it. The more you know about it, the more you realize that's ridiculous. It's impossible. It's way too complicated. The human brain, the human eye, the blood clotting system, the immune system, protein modification, and protein function. It's so much more complicated than you would think at first glance. And it's these major systems that all work simultaneously. They couldn't have just independently arisen. It's way too complicated. Okay, so anyways, let's look at the immune system here. Basically, you have an innate immune system which is non-specific. It just blocks any type of potential infection. And you have a barrier. It's called the epithelial lining of your skin, of your intestinal tract. And then you have the guard cells. These are typically going to be macrophages and dendritic cells. Those are like another type of macrophage, meaning macro means big, phage means eater, kind of like a Pac-Man cell that just eats other bacteria, for example. Okay, so once it gets a hold of a bacteria, it will then travel to a lymph node. Once it gets to the lymph node, it'll search around through the lymphocytes and try to find one that has a match, the ability to bind tightly to the antigen. An antigen is just a part of the infecting bacteria, and thus remove it from the system. There are cytotoxic T cells that'll just, kill the bacteria, and then it can be removed from the body. There's B lymphocytes, which produce antibodies that'll bind to the bacteria, for example, and then they send a signal to the macrophage to help it find it and bind it and remove it from the body. So that's a simplistic overview of the immune system, but the important point is these cells have to move all over the place, traveling to lymph nodes and getting back into the blood circulation, going around the circuit of the body and back to the site of where the infection is or where the tumor is. They also remove cancer cells. So here's a nice slide. I learned this originally from Dr. McDougall's lecture. Basically, a cancer cell has a doubling time. Let's say it's around 100 days. And it has to double, become 2 cells and 4 cells and 8 cells, so to speak. And we usually can't see it until it's about a centimeter big. By the time it's about a centimeter big, it can release a million cancer cells into the blood every day. Most of them can never find a secure lodging to grow, but some of them do. And the thing that removes these cancer cells from the body is the immune system. That's why you want to have a good functioning immune system. It protects you from cancer. Okay, here's a little bit more detail about what's happening with the cancer cells. So let's say you've got a lung cancer over here. These macrophages, these would be like dendritic cells having the projections around them. They look kind of like a starfish, the dendritic cells. Dendron means like a tree, so like the branches of a tree. It has these projections that stick out, enable it to sample more surface area. Okay, so it encounters an antigen. Let's just call this A for antigen. Antigen just means a part of a bacteria or a part of a cancer. The dendritic cell will then travel to the lymph node. So once it gets in the lymph node, it bounces around, bouncing off all these other lymphocytes, and they're trying to feel if one of them forms a tight match, a tight binding to the pathogen, the antigen, the part of the pathogen. Okay, so it needs to do that in order to be able to later on help remove them from the body. So once it's found that, the lymphocytes that will bind to the tumor antigen or the bacterial infecting particle will then have clonal expansion. They'll multiply their numbers very rapidly. Then they'll get back into the blood and they'll travel to the site of the primary tumor or the primary infection. Okay. one thing cancer will do is cancer will pump protons into the extracellular matrix. So here's a cancer cell. This is the inside of it. It's cytoplasm. And it'll pump these protons. H plus is a proton. And that will cause acidity of the surrounding extracellular matrix. And the reason it'll do that is this increased acidity suppresses the normal growing cells. The cancer cell, in a sense, is in competition with the cells around it. So this is like the base camp of the cancer cell. Here's the cancer stem cells that can keep on dividing, immortal and proliferate and grow out of control and kill the patient. And there's surrounding fibroblasts and other tumor-related cells. But it's an important point is that hydrogen protons are being pumped into the periphery of the cell, and these will suppress the immune system so that the immune system will not be able to remove the cancer cells. It's another reason why if you have cancer, you want to avoid acidic foods like meat. You'd prefer to eat, alkaline foods, like fruits and vegetables. Okay, so the low pH suppresses all these immune system cells. In a sense, this article describes as low pH in the tumor microenvironment is a global protection shield for the cancer. So that's not good. You don't want that. Okay, and I had other things that made me interested in the immune system lately. I do a lot of neck procedures. I've done, like probably around 2,000 procedures in the neck. And I've noticed, obviously anybody who looks at necks knows this, that the lymph nodes keep shrinking as the patients get older. There was a guy named Dr. Sam and his colleagues. They made a lymph node staging system many years ago for the neck. And these are the locations of the different lymph nodes. Most important one is level 2A. Those are upper jugular nodes. Level 3 would be middle level jugular nodes. Level 4 would be lower level jugular nodes. For example, the reason why the 2 category, 2A and 2B, ends up being most important is most antigens, bacterial infections, whatnot, happen up around there. A lot of the cancers do too, and they drain to these areas. So anyways, the point is, the staging system was based on old people with a typical cancer related to aging, alcohol, and tobacco, squamous cell carcinoma. But if you try applying that same staging system to the lymph nodes in younger people, the younger people just routinely have big lymph nodes. So me as a guy who does lots of neck biopsies, I kept getting all these young patients sent to me for biopsies, and it was ridiculous because I knew they didn't have anything. So we had to change how we look at lymph nodes in the neck. You can't just go by the old people classification of lymph node size. I also look at the morphology, the clinical context, and whatnot. Okay, so anyways, I had other observations, like from my colleagues. For example, I have a lady neuroradiologist friend, and she worked in a town where they had a lot of old Chinese people, an old Chinatown, and she noticed their brains look extraordinarily good. This brain, by the way, is quite atrophic. The brain is loose. It's moved far away from this inner table of the skull, and you see cerebral spinal fluid outlining the brain. So this would be a typical demented old brain with a lot of atrophy. All right, where she noticed these Chinatown brains, these patients had really tight-looking brains, meaning the brain parenchyma was up tight against the skull. And so the question is, why is that? The conclusion I'm at right now is I think it's all for the same reasons, the same things that cause atrophy of the brain, or atrophy of the brain elsewhere, and atrophy of other parts of the body are lack of blood supply, lack of oxygen. There's more to it than that. And this is going to be a very important thing as we go further along. That'll make sense. But I'm just telling you that I was trying to figure it out for my own sake because I have to look at a lot of these neck lymph nodes, and I wanted to understand them better. And I actually spoke to one hematopathologist, and he thinks it's probably the same stuff as elsewhere in the body. Overactivation of mTOR, early arrival at the Hayflick limit. Right in the upper chest, you've got something called the thymus. And the thymus is right behind the sternum up high, and that's where lymphocytes mature as T lymphocytes, T for thymus, T for those lymphocytes that mature in the thymus. And the thymus atrophies by the time a person hits, their 20s. So you start having less ability to make new, naive type T cells. So other things got my attention. McDougall had a good lecture, at the Chef AJ channel about Alan Cunningham's theory in 1977 of lymphomas being due to increased meat consumption causing overactivation of the immune system. People who ate fruits and vegetables as a large amount of their diet had less lymphomas. Lymphoma is a lymph node type of cancer. Okay. I'd also seen other things like Dean Ornish's work showed that telomeres can shorten, but they can potentially lengthen in other situations. I know of a couple different theories that help explain how brain cells degenerate. So the reason I was doing all this is to figure out how do you improve immune system function. Okay, I'll actually cover this slide in another topic. Okay. So lymphomas, this is the Alan Cunningham paper from 1977 from Dr. McDougall's lecture. Interesting stuff, okay? And then fruits and vegetables, also from Dr. McDougall's lecture, they slow down, they decrease the likelihood that you'll get a lymphoma. So they prevent overstimulation in the immune system, is what that appears to be. Then I saw a lecture by this lady here. Her name's Lydia Lynch. She's a PhD at Harvard in the immunology department. And she confirmed what we already know in humans. Whatever fat you eat, it doesn't matter what type, they all make the animal get fat, gain weight. In addition, though, she noticed that the high-fat diets, as well as the person being obese person ends up having higher blood lipids, more free fatty acids released in the blood. They have decreased immune function. So this Lydia Lynch here, she's actually originally from Ireland, and she noticed that fat person has more free fatty acids in the blood. A mouse, fat mouse, you feed them a high-fat diet, they get increased free fatty acids in the blood. Those increase insulin resistance, increase fatty liver, increase diabetes. But what was really interesting was they suppress the cytotoxic T cells, and which means they suppress the T cells, the ones that kill the tumor. So that's bad. And they increase the Tregs, T regulatory cells, which turn down the immune system. They also protect the tumor. So it's all bad. What she's basically saying here is being fat or eating high-fat foods increase the likelihood that cancer is going to grow. So the tumor can grow better in that context. She mentioned that when a cytotoxic T cell attaches to the target cell, let's say the cancer cell, it has to form a tight connection there, and it has to be able to do the steps necessary to sort of perforate the external plasma membrane of the cancer cell. And the fat paralyzes these immune system cells. That's the main point. The fat paralyzes immune system cells. Neil Bernard, nutrition expert, said that immune system can't work well in an oil slick, which is an oversimplification, but it carries the main idea through that high-fat diets and being fat leading to high-fat blood decrease immune function. And then Dr. Goldhammer with his group out in California put a patient, a 42-year-old woman with a lymphoma, they put her on a 21-day water fast only, and her lymph nodes dramatically shrank inside and were still small and non-palpable at 9 months follow-up. So that's just one single case report, but you know what? It's still an impressive, interesting concept. Okay, this guy Nav Chandel, real smart biochemist out of Northwestern, he made the point that it's not the genes, it's the metabolism that is the driver. Genes are just the passenger. And this is a scene from the comedy Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with Steve Martin, in this case being the metabolism, the driver, and John Candy being the gene expression. So that's an important point. Metabolism in the vast majority of people, almost everybody, is more important than the genes. So it makes it worth your while to optimize your metabolism. So this is a lecture by Luke O'Neill. He's a PhD biochemist who studies immunology in Ireland, and he's a real smart guy. And interesting comments he made is that mitochondria are the powerhouse in the center of immunity. They are right in the center of it. So that's interesting because, like I said, I've noticed from studying a lot about brain degeneration, mitochondria are right in the center of everything in the brain, whether or not you're going to handle your cytoplasm calcium well, because you need the ATP made by the mitochondria. And I had an internal medicine doctor say to me recently, Pete, you figured it out, the secret of health. After seeing your slides that all roads lead to calcium and that stuff about potassium and sodium ratios and the ion pumps related to potassium, sodium, and calcium, it all made sense. Cytoplasm concentration of calcium, what turns a cell on or off, and mitochondria production of ATP are what we should be focusing on. Instead, we're given drugs that damage the mitochondria and that increase cytoplasm calcium. Drug-based medicine for chronic disease, it's stupid. Okay, so I show you that because it's the truth. Okay, so anyways, here's a Krebs cycle in the mitochondrial matrix. And normally it runs in a forward direction, the characteristic pattern, and that's used to make a lot of ATP. But cancer can run it backwards. And when you run it backwards, it can be used to pull off intermediates and use that for biosynthesis. A cancer cell has to double itself before it can replicate. So it makes like essentially a copy of itself, and then it splits in half. And so that requires a lot of biosynthesis. There's 3.3 billion base pairs in the DNA genome of a human. So they got to make a lot of DNA, then they got to make a lot of proteins and a lot of membranes to make a copy of themselves. So here's this Luke O'Neill, PhD from Ireland, again saying, mitochondria are the center of the immune system. So what this means is you certainly want to avoid anything that's damaging your mitochondria, or you'll be in trouble up a creek. He also showed that you can run Krebs cycle in another different way. Off the connotate, you can make something called itaconate, and that's anti-inflammatory, it's antimicrobial, and so that's a real useful thing. So this Krebs cycle is right, in the center of all metabolism. It's used usually to make ATP energy, but you can pull stuff off of it to make proteins. You can pull stuff off of it, like from citrate, for example, to make lipids. And he's shown that you can pull itaconate off it from a connotate, and that can be quite antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory. Okay, here's a lady named Maria Mittelbrun. She is from Spain, and her group came to the conclusion, she leads a research lab, that when the immune system develops mitochondrial dysfunction, that's a sign of aging. It'll progressively get worse, and that will lead to accelerated aging in the patient. So basically, you want to take good care of your health, and hopefully your mitochondria will be healthy as well, and your immune system won't age so rapidly. Good inflammation is when it's localized, transient, and well controlled. So imagine you stepped on a thorn, it poked your toe, it became infected. You have a localized immune response to it. You remove the foreign body, remove the thorn, and it'll heal pretty quick typically. That's good inflammation. But bad inflammation is chronic systemic inflammation, like from having leaky gut, from not eating enough fiber, or all the other things that cause leaky gut. And that causes a diffuse, gradual debilitation of the human body. It's not a good thing, especially when it's severe and chronic. Okay, and this reminds me of like what Dr. Esselstyn said about endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme for making nitric oxide. It progressively decreases as a person gets older. Here's Maria Mittelbrun's paper about how dysfunctional mitochondria lead to multiple other diseases and a premature death of the patient, death of the mouse. So it's a big deal. How do you improve immune function? Okay, avoid excessive dietary fat. We just talked about that in the context of the research by Lydia Lynch. Avoid excess dietary sodium because it's a vasoconstrictor. It's going to decrease blood flow to the tissues, decrease oxygenation of the mitochondria. Okay, avoid acidity. And you can do that by avoiding excessive chloride. The chloride in sodium chloride displaces bicarbonate. The pH buffer leads to a low-grade metabolic acidosis. Amino acids are what make up proteins. They're amino acids. So they're a little bit acidic, especially animal protein because it's got more sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine and cysteine. Okay, stay warm. Now here's a good one that a lot of people don't know. The immune systems, in order to function, these immune cells have to travel all over the body, and they have to percolate through lymph nodes where they're trying to find a match. Where is the lymphocyte that will bind the new pathogen, the new cancer cell, abnormal proteins on the cancer cell surfaces, the new bacteria. So there has to be a whole bunch of collisions of lymphocytes bouncing into, let's say, macrophages carrying their pathogens, like on their outer surface, antigen-presenting cells. And so when you're warm, your cells travel around faster, they bump around faster, and they can figure out where's a match that's going to effectively remove the cancer cells or the infection. So being warm helps to improve immune function. That's why you get a fever. That's one of the reasons why you get a fever when you have an infection, because it helps the body to clear the infection. Other things that help, eating the plants, because people tend to be deficient in the vasodilators, potassium, magnesium, and the nitrates. And also antioxidants, and they also tend to be short on fiber. If you're short on fiber, you're more predisposed to leaky gut, and that leads to secondary problems of clotting. I gave previous lectures about that before. Amyloid-type clotting, amyloidogenic clotting, you could call it, from the bacterial endotoxins like LPS, LTA getting across the gut barrier. In general, you want to be in PANS as much as you can. PANS means parasympathetic. That's the feed and breathe, rest and digest half of the autonomic nervous system. When you feel calm and everything's fine. Okay, so that's an on switch for the immune system to help heal the body of any of its problems. Whereas being stressed out in a fight or flight mode response, survival mode, that turns off the immune system. It's like an off switch for the immune system. SANS means sympathetic autonomic nervous system, because that elevates cortisol. Cortisol is elevated to get the blood glucose up, and amongst other things. But the bottom line is it switches off the immune system. So you don't want that. You don't want your immune system switched off. And so get your sleep. Your immune system functions well while you're asleep. Manage your stress. Religion gives you a sense of purpose. Coming up with your own sense of purpose. Positive conversations. Comedy. Social support. All of those things improve immune function. So you want to do that as much as you can. And in the end, what are we basically doing? We're basically playing chess with death, and so it's good to know all this stuff about how the immune system works so you can optimize. You know, it's good to know about these other toxins and stuff, because how can you get out of the path of the firing line unless you can see it? You have to see it to know what to avoid. Okay, so anyways, The Night Playing Chess with Death comes from the movie Seventh Seal. It's a movie by Ingmar Bergman in 1957. It's a good movie. It's not a great movie, but it's a good movie. And there's actually a nice painting of it by Albert Pictor from probably, like 100 or more years. A long, long time ago. I don't remember the exact date on the painting. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. And so what are, I think, the big take-home points from this lecture is, number one, staying warm will help you to have better immune function. So I like to be warm. I'll wear an additional t-shirt, sweatshirt, and sweat jacket when I'm just sitting around the house. I like to be warm. I'm skinnier than most of my meat-eating fat relatives, so they like the house colder, which I don't like. They like the air conditioning. Okay, but being warm improves immune function. The other thing that improves immune function is exercise, because it gets the lymphatics to pump and to move the white blood cells along the lymphatics. Your heart connects to your arteries, which pumps blood through your arteries. They then go through the capillaries into the vein, return to the heart. But there's no pump on the lymphatics. So exercise, moving around, contracting the muscles, that pumps the lymphatics and gets those white blood cells circulating around the body faster, so they can find the cancer cells and remove them. So they can find bacterial infections cells and remove them, and that improves your immune function. So anyways, hope that was interesting.